So kind of jumping into 42 floors, could you maybe speak to that kind of transition into more of the commercial market and and then from there even a segue into interviewed?
Yeah. So 42 floors, again, as a recap, was really going after the, Airbnb or Zillow for commercial real estate. I was not one of the founders, joined as a very early employee there. They had this like very, I would say, like huge launch back in 2012, about a year before I joined, where they had a very funny structure. Like there were like 8 co-founders to the business. They had raised, by the time that I joined as employee, like literally number like 2 outside of the co-founding team, they had already raised like $20 million, basically like all in the first year. They raised like a seed, they raised a $7 million A, and then like a $12 million Series B, all like spaced like 5 to 6 months apart. And so the challenge there was an interesting one, whereas like an operator, I had come off of this, Zillow experience, and effectively was brought in to say, awesome, we have a team now of 10 people or whatever it was, and we have $20 million in the bank. How do we make money? That was just a lot of like trial and error. So some of the first things that we did, I mean, every business, every marketplace has its challenges. Again, in this particular one, the challenge for us was that this business, 42 Floors, had started in San Francisco in 2012 to 2013. And again, for those of you who were working at or running companies in 2013, at least in San Francisco, it was a crazy frothy time, right? We go through these like kind of peaks and valleys in terms of funding. And so 2013, 2014 was like, it kind of felt like how it is today, at least for like really hot like VC backed startups in San Francisco, where things are just getting crazy from a valuation perspective. So lots and lots of pre-revenue companies were coming out of, Y Combinator and out of 500 startups and Techstars and various accelerators with millions of dollars pre-revenue with small teams. And they were all looking for, very cool offices to attract better talent and to convince people from Facebook and Google to jump over. And so there was this actually crazy amount of inbound leads that 42 Floors was getting. And we had a challenge that was, we basically wanted to serve the other side of that marketplace with brokers, but no brokers want to work with small leads, right? So it was this kind of wild dynamic of, for a lot of marketplaces, supply or demand side is always, exponentially harder than the other. And often that's, it's easy to get supply and it's really hard to drive demand to that supply. But for us, this was like completely inverted. We had, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I mean, on a monthly basis, as a relatively small team, we had thousands of inbound requests, just primarily in San Francisco, from startups mostly, but also more traditional businesses like small law firms and accounting firms that were looking for office space. And, in real estate, there's all sorts of, regulations around who's actually able to show that space. So we as like, engineers and salespeople couldn't just go around the city and unlock doors for people. And so we had to find brokers who would do that. And there's kind of there's actually multiple sides on the supply side of real estate, right? You have like the landlord who has the building, you have an agent who's representing that landlord, and then traditionally you have a tenant rep broker who's representing the tenant. And so you're not coordinating with a single person, you're not coordinating with like a home buyer, you're coordinating with like a whole set of people. And with small spaces, this is really tricky because landlords know that they're popular, so they don't want to make concessions. Brokers generally don't care about them. I mean, if you think about, this is something that I always think about with marketplaces, like if you're serving a like service-based, commission-based industry, you're building an insurance marketplace or a real estate marketplace. The people that are serving those leads on the other side, it's an hour and a half of their time to go and unlock the door for a 300 square foot space and it's an hour and a half of their time to go unlock the door for a 300,000 square foot space. So all brokers, everybody serving those types of like, commission only deals are naturally incentivized to go whale hunting. And so if your marketplace is servicing the long tail, which most marketplaces are, at least in the first few years, it's really hard to get that right. And so we tried to fix this through a number of things. We introduced a round robin system for leads, where we were like hustling, going around the city, meeting every person basically that got their real estate license within the last 12 months. We wanted to meet, and this is like publicly accessible. And the thesis was, if you've just gotten your real estate license, you're starting from nowhere, and we can help you by sending you a bunch of leads, and you'll be our person who like goes around the city and unlocks doors for us. And so we tried this. It worked, I think, medium well. We got, I think, 20 brokers who had all been licensed for under a couple of years onto the platform, and we basically round robin leads. So every day, dozens of leads would come in. We were not doing a great job at lead qualification, and this became a problem later on. But we would basically take a lead. Hey, I want to, I just got funded. I want 1,500 square feet for a few of us in this part of San Francisco. And then that lead would go, at the time, 6 or 7 years ago, via text message through like a daisy chain of brokers. And then the first broker to say okay on the SMS would basically stop the chain. They would then be sent a text message with the person's information who wants the space. They would call the person, and then they would kind of meet up, and we would just do matchmaking that way. So there was no apps. We never built anything like mobile. This was all done through like SMS. And then, we were kind of connecting, I think, through like Twilio numbers, where we were like proxying it on both sides, where, tenants could then text that broker or call them directly once they got connected. And then, yeah, eventually we moved into a vertically integrated, offering, which is amazing in some ways, really challenging in others. Our revenue in San Francisco basically went from, I think, tens of thousands of dollars per month connecting leads to these first 20 brokers to like $2 million annually. So we went from a few $1,000s a month to like $200,000 a month, because we started actually like serving these deals internally, hiring our own brokers, and then like facilitating them closing the lease and getting paid when we would close the lease. But I think 42 Floors was ultimately it was a tale in, I think, number one, over raising. It's a really bad idea to raise $20 million before you have revenue, even if you can get it. And so the expectations at the point that you were going for like Series C, Series D, like growth stage rounds, nobody cares about $2 million a year. They want to see $10 million, $15 million per year. And that's really hard to do. And then the second thing there is, I think as a team, we spent money just like crazy. Like we were trying to aggressively get to these goals. And so we overhired, we hired the wrong people. We tried too many experiments at once. At 42 Floors, it's you're having to get your own listings. You're having to drive your own demand of tenants who want to see those listings. And now we were kind of competing by building a brokerage internally. We were competing with the very people who we were, asking for their listings. We were going out and competing with them on deals. So it's, real estate, really hard business. But we tried to take one of the lessons that we learned from this business. There was ultimately kind of a turnaround story, by the way, that I can tell. But so at the time in February of 2015, I started to get very excited about starting my own company and kind of doing this in a better way, a more capital efficient way. And so I left with two other early employees who were also both engineers, and we started Interviewed. And Interviewed was really about fixing a lot of the hiring mistakes that we had made at 42 Floors. We hired people largely on culture fit, not on their skills. And so we wanted to build an entire company that was very like thesis driven around skills-based hiring. So ultimately, when around the time that we left, 42 Floors laid off about 50% of their workforce. They shifted models around quite a bit. They continued to really drive like supply and demand on the marketplace side. They kind of doubled down and got more serious about data and selling that data to large companies around like real estate trends. It was a good outcome. They 42 Floors exited to Knotel, which is kind of a secondary like WeWork competitor. They've raised several $100 million and are trying to run a more capital efficient version of WeWork. And at that time though we were already about a year into running Interviewed. And so